Hi guys, here's our last video about non-experimental and quasi-experimental research strategies. In this video, we're going to be talking about one particular class of this research, developmental research, where we're interested in how people differ depending on how old they are. So in this kind of design, like I said, we're interested in studying changes or differences in behavior that are related to our age. These are considered non-experimental because we can't randomly assign people to different age groups, and we can't control which age comes before the other. There are three basic categories, which I'll talk about now. Now, I've been using this kind of research in my work. I'm interested in how networks in our brain allow us to read words, understand speech, and regulate our attention. And I'm interested in how this differs or changes with development. So I have kids of different ages come into the lab, put on these EEG caps, and I record their brain activity while they do different tasks. So I can do this in different ways. The easiest way is using a cross-sectional design where we compare different groups of kids that are of different ages. Now, these groups obviously are non-equivalent because I'm not assigning them to the different ages. So again, this is why it falls into the non-experimental category. So an example of this is looking at brain mechanisms that we use to read by comparing groups of kids that are in kindergarten who don't yet read, in grade 2 or grade 3 who are still just learning, versus in grade 8 who are now fluent readers. The conclusion that we can draw from these studies is that brain processing differs in children of different ages. Another way that we can do this, and this is considered, better, higher quality research when we can do this, although it takes more time and it's more work, is longitudinal developmental research. This involves testing the same group of children over time as they age. So an example of this is, here's my oldest, Julian. He's been in my research many times, and we can look to see how the brain changes as children grow and as they learn to read by comparing them before they know how to read, around age 7 as they're learning, and then again at age 13. Here we go over here. So the conclusion that we can draw from this kind of research is that brain processing changes as children age. So what are some pros and cons of these different categories, these different ways that we can do developmental research? Let's start over on the left with the cross-sectional. Well, the benefit of this is that it's much easier. We can, in 1 year, test all of the people that we want to test by comparing different groups of people. The downside is that factors other than age may differentiate between groups. And this is why our conclusion can only be about group differences and not about changes over time. So for example, there may be a difference between a 5-year-old and a 15-year-old. Well, they differ in age, obviously, but there may be other ways that they differ. For example, 5-year-olds have been exposed to technology from a younger age compared to maybe 15-year-olds who maybe didn't have that exposure at a young age. And so their ability, for example, to process visual patterns may be different, and this may be independent of their age. So this is an example of assignment bias. Because we don't assign participants to a group, there's the possibility that factors other than that variable that we're interested in may differentiate between groups. And here it's age. So there may be other factors other than age that differentiate groups. So that's the downside of cross-sectional. Let's talk about longitudinal now. Basically, the pros of one are the cons of the other. So the benefit of longitudinal research is we don't have to worry about those cohort or generational effects, and we're measuring changes in the same individual. So the same people serve as their own controls. The downside is that it takes more time. We have to do our research over many years, and that people might drop out of the study, and the people who drop out may be different than the ones that stay. And this may introduce a bias in our research. So all of this means that we have to take this into consideration. And when you guys maybe end up doing some research or you propose it for your research proposal, you want to weigh the pros and the cons and pick the design that you think will work best. Finally, there's a third category. It's kind of like a hybrid of these. It's called cross-sectional longitudinal. It sounds kind of complicated, but let me give you an example of what this would look like. So let's say we're interested in studying, changes in the brain as children learn to read. We could, in 1 year, test 3 groups of kids that are in grade 1, 2, and 3, and then follow those 3 groups over time. So then the next year, those kids will be in grade 2, 3, and 4. And then the following year, they'd be in grades 3, 4, and 5. So the benefit of this is we're studying people over time, but we're doing it in a shorter period of time. So over 3 years, we can get data that tells us about changes that happen and differences that happen from grade 1 to grade 5. So I'd like you to, here's a chance for you to think about some of what we just talked about and get you ready for the quiz. Cohort effects are an example of an assignment bias in non-equivalent group designs. I want you to think for a second of some other factors other than age that might differentiate you from, say, your grandparents, some experiences that you've had or skills that you've developed. How might this impact your susceptibility to disease or your performance on an IQ test or your ability to navigate your new iPhone? Why don't you think about that if you can? So to summarize, developmental research allows us to look at the effects of age and what effect that has on our behavior. There's 3 main types: cross-sectional, longitudinal, and cross-sectional longitudinal. All of these fit into the category of non-experimental because we don't have control over assigning participants to groups and we don't have control over time. That's it for this week's video. A great review would be for you to take all of these different terminologies, all of these different categories, designs, ways that we can do non-experiment and quasi-experiment, see if you can match their term with what they do. And as bonus, try to see if you can tell yourself which is non-experiment, which is quasi-experiment, and why, and try to think of your own examples. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.